The howling echoed across the barren landscape as Piper Fremont's wagon wheel cracked against a jagged rock, sending her reeling into the unforgiving wilderness of Wyoming Territory. The year was 1876, and as dusk settled over the rolling plains, she knew she'd made a terrible mistake trying to reach Sweetwater Springs before nightfall. Piper wiped sweat from her brow, the late summer heat still lingering despite the setting sun. Her journey west had been driven by desperation after her father's death left their Philadelphia home buried in debt. The promise of a teaching position in the frontier town of Sweetwater Springs had seemed like salvation until now. "Steady, girls," she soothed her team of horses as they stamped nervously. The broken wheel would require proper tools to fix, and Piper had neither the strength nor the expertise to manage it alone. She secured the horses as best she could, taking stock of her surroundings. The vast emptiness of the Wyoming prairie stretched in every direction, golden grasses swaying in the evening breeze. The distant mountains were turning purple against the darkening sky. Beauty and danger intertwined in this wild landscape, a fact Piper was acutely aware of as she gathered wood for a fire. As shadows lengthened, she worked methodically, retrieving her father's old revolver from her travel chest. She'd learned to shoot during their brief time in Colorado when her father's health had first begun to fail. Though not expert with the weapon, Piper knew enough to defend herself, or so she hoped. The fire crackled to life, casting an orange glow that pushed back the encroaching darkness. Piper settled beside it, wrapping her shawl tighter as the temperature dropped. She'd made camp many times during her journey west, but never so exposed, never so vulnerable. The first howl came as the last light faded from the sky. Distant at first, then answered by another, closer. Piper's hand moved to the revolver, her heart quickening. Wolves. In Philadelphia, wolves existed only in storybooks and cautionary tales. Here they were as real as the hard ground beneath her. "Stay calm," she whispered to herself, feeding more wood to the fire. Light was her protection. Wolves feared fire, or so she'd been told. But as the howls multiplied and drew nearer, Piper wondered if that wisdom would hold true for a hungry pack. She saw the first pair of eyes reflecting the firelight, amber orbs hovering in the darkness beyond her camp. Then another pair and another. They moved silently now, circling, calculating. Piper counted 6 sets of eyes, though there could be more beyond her sight. Rising slowly, she held the revolver with both hands the way her father had taught her. "Go away," she shouted, her voice thin against the vastness of the night. "Get back." A large gray wolf stepped into the firelight, lean and powerful, regarding her with unnerving intelligence. Piper fired a warning shot into the air, the report echoing across the prairie. The wolves scattered momentarily but returned within minutes, emboldened rather than frightened. They were closing in, tightening their circle. Piper's hands trembled as she realized her predicament. 6 shots in her revolver, at least 6 wolves, and she was no marksman. Terror clutched at her throat as a second wolf, black as the night itself, inched forward, teeth bared. She fired again, the bullet kicking up dirt near the wolf. It jumped back, snarling. The others paused, but their retreat was temporary. Hunger drove them forward once more. 3 wolves lunged at once from different directions. Piper screamed, firing wildly, hitting nothing. She backed against her wagon as the pack closed in. 4 shots gone, 2 remaining, and the wolves were undeterred. Her breath came in short gasps as panic overwhelmed her. Suddenly, gunshots rang out from the darkness beyond, sharp, precise reports that split the night. 1 wolf yelped and fell. Another shot, another yelp. The remaining wolves scattered, melting into the darkness as swiftly as they had appeared. "Stay down," a man's voice commanded from the blackness. More shots followed, methodical and purposeful, tracking the retreating wolves. Piper pressed herself against the wagon wheel, clutching her nearly empty revolver as her savior continued firing into the night. Then silence fell, broken only by the crackling of her fire and the hammering of her heart. Piper strained to see through the darkness, her breath still coming in ragged gasps. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and broad-shouldered, rifle in hand. As he stepped into the firelight, Piper saw a man in his early 30s, with weathered features and eyes as clear and watchful as a mountain lake. His dark hair fell in waves beneath a worn leather hat, and several days' worth of stubble darkened his jaw. "You all right, madam?" he asked, his voice deep and graveled from disuse. Piper realized she was still pointing her revolver at him and slowly lowered it. "Yes," she managed, her voice barely audible, then, clearing her throat, "Yes, thank you, they were going to." "Wolves get bold when they're hungry," he said simply, scanning the darkness beyond their small circle of light. "They won't be back tonight, but we should keep the fire high." He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to the wilderness, checking the perimeter of her camp before returning to the fire. Up close, Piper could see the dust of the trail on his clothes' faded denim pants, a chambray shirt beneath a leather vest, and well-worn boots. A gun belt hung at his waist, the holster showing the same signs of use as the man himself. "Jackson Calloway," he introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "Most folks call me Jack." "Piper Freemont," she replied, extending a still trembling hand. "I'm grateful for your intervention, Mr. Calloway." His handshake was firm but gentle. "Just happened to be in the right place, saw your fire from a ridge back yonder." He gestured vaguely to the east. "Figured someone might be having trouble. Wagon wheel?" he asked, nodding toward the damaged wheel. "Yes, I hit a rock trying to make Sweetwater Springs before dark." Jack nodded, moving to examine the damage. "You're still a good day's ride from Sweetwater. This wheel needs more than a quick fix." He glanced back at her. "Teacher." Piper blinked in surprise. "How did you know?" A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Town's been waiting on a new schoolteacher. Word travels. Plus," he added, nodding toward her trunk where a few books were visible, "not many folks out here travel with Shakespeare." She smiled despite herself. "I start next week, or I was supposed to. Now I'm not sure I'll make it in time." "You'll make it," he said with quiet certainty. "My place is about 2 hours' ride from here. Got tools that can fix your wheel proper. We can head there at first light, make repairs, and have you in Sweetwater by tomorrow evening." Piper hesitated, weighing her limited options. Jack Calloway seemed honorable enough, and she had little choice but to trust someone. Still, accepting a stranger's help, especially a man's, went against everything she'd been taught about propriety. Seeing her hesitation, Jack added, "I'll sleep by the fire out here. You can keep to your wagon. And if it helps any, Sheriff Matthews in Sweetwater knows me. I supply the town with beef." "You're a cattle rancher, hunter, whatever keeps food on the table." He settled by the fire, adding more wood. "This territory doesn't allow for just one trade." As the night deepened, they talked. Jack proved to be surprisingly educated for a frontiersman, speaking knowledgeably about the territory and its history. He'd come west after the war, he explained, seeking space and silence after too many years of chaos. "And you?" he asked. "What brings a Philadelphia lady all the way to Wyoming?" Piper found herself telling him about her father's illness, the mounting debts, and the teaching position that offered a chance at independence. Jack listened without judgment, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "Brave thing, coming out here alone," he said finally. "Necessary, not brave," she corrected. "Though after tonight I'm questioning my judgment. Wolves are just doing what wolves do," Jack said, stirring the fire. "It's people you need to watch for out here. Some are worse than any predator on 4 legs." "Are you warning me away from Sweetwater Springs, Mr. Calloway?" His eyes met hers across the fire. "No, madam, Sweetwater's decent enough. Just saying the territory can be harsh in ways city folk don't always expect." Piper considered this. "I may be from the city, Mr. Calloway, but I'm not as delicate as I appear." For the first time, Jack smiled fully, transforming his solemn face. "I believe that, Miss Freemont. Not many would keep their wits with a wolf pack closing in." They fell silent, the crackling fire and distant night sounds filling the space between them. Despite the lingering fear from the wolf attack, Piper felt oddly at ease in this stranger's company. Perhaps it was the straightforward way he spoke, or the respectful distance he maintained. Whatever the reason, she found herself grateful for more than just his timely arrival. "You should get some rest," Jack said eventually. "I'll keep watch." "You need sleep too," Piper protested. "Used to long nights," he replied. "I'll wake you at dawn." True to his word, Jack remained by the fire while Piper retired to her wagon. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully, her dreams filled with amber eyes and snarling teeth. Each time she woke, she could see Jack's silhouette against the firelight, rifle across his knees, keeping his vigil. Morning arrived with a palette of pinks and golds across the eastern sky. Piper emerged from the wagon to find coffee brewing over a fresh fire and Jack returning from scouting the area. "No sign of our friends from last night," he reported, pouring her a cup of the strong, black coffee. "They've moved on to easier hunting grounds." Over a simple breakfast of hardtack and jerky, they discussed the day ahead. Jack would ride ahead to his ranch and return with tools and his wagon. Then they'd transfer her belongings and secure her wagon until proper repairs could be made. "I can't ask you to go to such trouble," Piper said. "You didn't ask," Jack pointed out. "Besides, can't leave a lady stranded in wolf territory, wouldn't sit right." His horse, a magnificent chestnut gelding, stood patiently nearby. Jack checked Piper's team to ensure they were properly secured, then mounted up. 2 hours there, 2 back, he promised. "Keep your fire going and that revolver loaded, just in case." As Jack rode away, Piper found herself watching until horse and rider disappeared over a distant rise. There was something compelling about the solitary figure, a man clearly accustomed to his own company, yet willing to disrupt his routine for a stranger in need. The morning passed slowly. Piper sorted through her belongings, setting aside what she might need for the next day or two. Her thoughts kept returning to her unlikely rescuer. Jackson Calloway was nothing like the men she'd known in Philadelphia, no polished manners or rehearsed compliments. Yet there was an authenticity to him that she found refreshing. Just as she'd calculated, Jack returned midday, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 strong draft horses. He worked efficiently to transfer her belongings, then secured her damaged wagon under a canvas tarp. "We can send someone from town to fetch it once the wheel's fixed," he explained, helping Piper onto the seat of his wagon. "My place isn't far, but the trail gets rough in places." Jack's definition of rough proved to be an understatement. The trail wound through rocky terrain and across streams swollen from recent mountain rains. He handled the team expertly, though, navigating obstacles with practiced ease. As they traveled, the landscape changed, becoming more varied and lush. Pine forests gave way to open meadows, and distant mountains provided a majestic backdrop to their journey. Jack pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the land, which areas were good for hunting, which streams held the fattest trout, which ridges to avoid during thunderstorms. "There it is," he said finally as they crested a hill in late afternoon. Calloway Ranch. Below them stretched a modest but well-maintained homestead. A sturdy log cabin sat nestled against a stand of pines, smoke curling from its chimney. A barn, corral, and several outbuildings completed the picture. A creek ran along one side of the property, and beyond it, cattle grazed in verdant pastures. "It's lovely," Piper said sincerely. It wasn't grand, but everything about the place spoke of care and hard work. "It's home," Jack replied simply, though she caught a note of pride in his voice. As they approached, a dog came bounding to meet them, a large, shaggy beast that Piper momentarily mistook for a wolf. Her body tensed automatically. "That's just Ranger," Jack assured her. "Looks fierce, but he's gentle as a lamb with friends." True enough, once Jack introduced them, the dog became all wagging tail and eager affection, nearly bowling Piper over in his enthusiasm. "He doesn't see many visitors," Jack explained, leading the way to the cabin. "Gets excited when company comes." "Do you have many visitors?" Piper asked, following him up the path. "You're the first in about 6 months," he admitted, "unless you count old Henry, who delivers mail when he remembers to." The cabin's interior surprised Piper. While rustic, it was clean and well-ordered. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with comfortable-looking furniture arranged before it. Bookshelves lined another wall, packed with volumes that made Piper's eyes widen in appreciation. "You're a reader," she observed. Jack looked almost embarrassed. Winter nights get long, books help pass the time. He showed her to a small room off the main living area. You can stay here, it's not much, but it's private. The room was simple but comfortable, containing a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small window overlooking the creek. A colorful quilt covered the bed, its intricate pattern speaking of hours of careful work. "This quilt is beautiful," Piper commented, running her fingers over the fabric. "My mother's work," Jack said, lingering in the doorway. "One of the few things I brought west with me." There was a story there, Piper sensed, but didn't press. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Calloway." "Jack," he corrected. "Out here, formalities don't seem to fit." "Jack," she agreed with a smile. "And I'm Piper," he nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "I'll see to your wagon wheel while you get settled. There's fresh water in the kitchen if you want to wash up." Left alone, Piper took stock of her situation. In less than a day, she'd survived a wolf attack and now found herself the guest of a solitary rancher whose bookshelves suggested depths not immediately apparent. The proper thing would be to insist on continuing to town immediately. Propriety demanded it. But exhaustion and practicality argued otherwise. After washing away the dust of travel, Piper ventured outside to find Jack already at work on her wagon wheel. He'd brought it from their camp and set up a workbench near the barn. His movements were precise as he assessed the damage, his focus complete. "Can I help?" she offered. Jack looked up, seeming surprised to find her there. "You know much about wagon repair?" "Nothing at all," Piper admitted, "but I'm a quick study." He considered this, then nodded toward a nearby stool. "You can hand me tools, and maybe learn something useful for your next breakdown." For the next hour, Piper assisted as Jack worked, learning the names and purposes of tools she'd never seen before. He was a patient teacher, explaining each step of the repair process. His hands, though calloused and strong, handled the delicate work with surprising gentleness. "You're good at this," Piper observed as he fitted a new spoke into place. "Necessity," Jack replied. "Out here, you either learn to fix things yourself or you do without." "Is that why you live alone? Self-sufficiency?" His hands paused momentarily. "Partly. Some men aren't meant for town life." "And some women aren't meant for city life," Piper countered, thinking of her stifling existence in Philadelphia after her father's death. Jack studied her thoughtfully. "Sweetwater might disappoint you. It's not much more than a dusty street with pretensions." "I'm not looking for excitement, just a fresh start." As the sun began to set, they moved inside. Jack prepared a simple but hearty meal of venison stew and fresh bread that he admitted came from his occasional trading with a neighbor several miles away. "Mrs. Bennett bakes enough for an army," he explained. "Trades me bread for venison and the occasional repair job." Over dinner, their conversation flowed more easily. Jack spoke of his time during the war, serving with the Union cavalry, and his decision to head west afterward. Piper shared stories of teaching in Philadelphia and her dreams for the school in Sweetwater Springs. "They've got 15 children enrolled already," she told him. "Ages 6 to 16. I'll be teaching everything from basic letters to algebra and literature." "Ambitious," Jack commented. "Most frontier schools stick to the basics." "Children deserve more than basics, no matter where they live," Piper said firmly. "Knowledge opens doors." Jack smiled at her conviction. "Sweetwater's lucky to have you." As night fell, they moved to the chairs by the fireplace. Jack offered Piper a book from his collection, a volume of Thoreau that showed signs of frequent reading. "You like Thoreau?" she asked, surprised. "Man knew the value of solitude," Jack replied, stoking the fire, "and of living deliberately." "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately," Piper quoted. "To front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach." Jack looked at her with new appreciation. "You know your Thoreau." "My father was a professor of literature before his health failed," she explained. "Our home was full of books and ideas." They sat in comfortable silence for a time, the crackling fire and occasional turning of pages the only sounds. Piper found herself stealing glances at her host. In the firelight, his features seemed softer, the hardness of the trail giving way to a quiet thoughtfulness. "Why did you help me?" she asked suddenly. You could have ridden past. Jack considered the question. Would you have kept riding if you'd seen someone in trouble? No, but I'm not. Piper hesitated. Not what? A solitary rancher who prefers his own company. There was no bitterness in his tone, just simple acknowledgement. I didn't mean to offend, she said quickly. You didn't, he assured her. It's a fair question. Truth is, I don't have a good answer except that it was the right thing to do. Piper nodded, accepting this. Well, I'm grateful, whatever your reasons. The next morning dawned clear and promising. Jack had risen before first light, and Piper found him already tending to the livestock when she emerged from the cabin. They shared a quick breakfast before Jack hitched up his wagon for the journey to Sweetwater Springs. Your wheel's fixed, he told her. I've loaded it in the back. The town blacksmith can reattach it properly. The trip to Sweetwater took most of the day, with Jack pointing out landmarks and sharing the history of the area as they traveled. He knew the territory intimately. Every creek, ridge, and valley seemed to hold a story. How long have you lived here? Piper asked as they forded a shallow stream. Going on 8 years now, Jack replied. Came west in '68, worked cattle drives for a spell, then staked my claim in '71. Alone all that time, he nodded, his eyes on the trail ahead. Suits me. Piper wasn't so sure. There was a wistfulness in his tone that suggested his solitude wasn't entirely by choice. But she didn't press the matter, sensing it was a subject best left untouched. As the afternoon waned, the settlement of Sweetwater Springs came into view. It was, as Jack had suggested, little more than a wide spot in the road, a main street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple rising at one end, a livery stable at the other. Yet to Piper it represented possibility. Not much to look at, Jack commented, seeing her expression. It's perfect, Piper replied. It's a beginning. They drew curious glances as they drove down the main street. A small town like Sweetwater noticed newcomers, especially when they arrived in the company of the reclusive rancher everyone knew by reputation but few knew personally. Jack directed the wagon to a modest building with a freshly painted sign, Sweetwater Springs Schoolhouse. A gray-haired woman stood on the porch, her face lighting with recognition as they approached. Miss Freemont, we'd begun to worry, she called, hurrying down the steps. You were expected yesterday, Mrs. Hollister, Piper greeted her, recognizing the school board chairwoman from their correspondence. I apologize for the delay, I had some trouble on the trail. Mrs. Hollister's gaze shifted to Jack, her expression a mixture of surprise and curiosity. Mr. Calloway, unusual to see you in town. Jack touched the brim of his hat politely. Madam, just helping Miss Freemont after a wagon accident. As Piper explained the broken wheel and wolf encounter, Mrs. Hollister's eyes widened. Merciful heavens, you might have been killed. She turned to Jack with newfound appreciation. It seems we owe you our thanks, Mr. Calloway. Jack shrugged off the gratitude. Just happened to be passing by. With Mrs. Hollister's help, they unloaded Piper's belongings into the small quarters attached to the schoolhouse, 2 rooms that would serve as her home during the school term. Jack remained mostly silent, carrying trunks and boxes with efficient strength, his presence a steady counterpoint to Mrs. Hollister's excited chatter about the upcoming school year. As the sun began to set, Jack prepared to depart. He stood awkwardly by his wagon, hat in hand, as Piper walked him out. I can't thank you enough, she said sincerely, for everything. No need for thanks, he replied, his eyes meeting hers briefly before looking away. You would have managed, perhaps, but I'm glad I didn't have to. Piper hesitated, then added, will you come to town for the Harvest Festival next month? I'd like to properly repay your kindness. Something flickered in his expression, interest, perhaps quickly masked. Don't get to town much, he said finally, but I'll think on it. With that, he replaced his hat, climbed onto his wagon, and with a final nod drove away. Piper watched until he disappeared from view, a curious emptiness settling in her chest. It seemed strange that a man she'd known for barely 2 days could leave such an impression. Remarkable man, that one, Mrs. Hollister commented, joining Piper on the porch. Been in these parts for years, but keeps to himself. Never seen him take an interest in anyone's troubles before. He said he was just passing by, Piper replied. Mrs. Hollister made a skeptical sound. Calloway Ranch is a good 10 miles off the main trail. He wasn't just passing by anything. This revelation stayed with Piper as she settled into her new life in Sweetwater Springs. The school term began the following week, bringing 15 eager, or not so eager, students under her tutelage. The work was challenging but rewarding, absorbing her days completely, yet in quiet evenings, her thoughts often drifted to the solitary rancher and his bookshelf full of surprising depth. Had he gone out of his way to help her? And if so, why? October brought the Harvest Festival, transforming Sweetwater's Main Street into a lively celebration of autumn bounty. Stalls displayed preserves and baked goods. Competitions for the largest pumpkin and best apple pie created friendly rivalries, and a dance was planned for the evening. Piper found herself scanning the crowds throughout the day, looking for a tall figure in a worn leather hat. But as twilight fell and lanterns were lit for the dance, she accepted that Jack Calloway had chosen solitude over celebration, looking for someone, Miss Freemont. Sheriff Matthews asked, appearing beside her with 2 cups of cider. Piper accepted the offered drink with a smile. Just taking in the festivities, Sheriff. Matthews was a shrewd man in his 40s with observant eyes that suggested he missed little. Thought you might be watching for Calloway. Mrs. Hollister mentioned he helped you when you first arrived. He did, Piper acknowledged. I hope to thank him properly. Jack's not one for crowds, Matthews said, watching the dancers twirl in the street. War changed him, from what I hear. Came west like a lot of soldiers, looking for space to put the memories behind him. You know him well, known him 8 years and can't say I know him at all, the sheriff admitted. Keeps his business to himself, pays his taxes, helps when there's trouble. That's about all anyone can say about Jack Calloway. The conversation shifted to other topics, but Piper's thoughts remained on the absent rancher. What memories was he trying to escape, and why did the thought of him alone on his remote homestead trouble her so? The answer came unexpectedly 3 weeks later, when early November brought the first serious snowfall of the season. Piper had dismissed her students early as the storm intensified and was preparing for a quiet evening when a knock sounded at her door. Opening it revealed Jack Calloway, snow dusting his shoulders and hat, a crate of supplies at his feet. "Jack," she exclaimed, surprise and pleasure mingling in her voice. "Come in out of the cold." He removed his hat as he entered, revealing hair longer than she remembered. "Sheriff asked me to bring these by," he explained, nodding to the crate. "Medical supplies from Cheyenne. Doctor's wagon can't get through until the pass clears." "That's very kind," Piper said, closing the door against the swirling snow. "Can I offer you coffee?" "Or something stronger to ward off the chill?" Jack hesitated, looking as though he might refuse, then nodded. Coffee would be welcome. As Piper busied herself with the stove, she stole glances at her unexpected visitor. He seemed thinner than she remembered, the angles of his face more pronounced. His clothes showed signs of hard wear, though they were clean and well-mended. "How have you been?" she asked, setting out cups and a plate of cookies left over from her students' afternoon snack. "Well enough," he replied, standing awkwardly until she gestured for him to sit at her small table. "Ranch keeps me busy." "I imagined it would." Piper poured coffee for them both. "I've been meaning to write and thank you properly for your help." "No need," Jack said, warming his hands around the cup. "How are you finding Sweetwater?" Piper smiled, grateful for the shift in conversation. "I love it. The children are bright and eager mostly. The community has been welcoming. It feels right being here." As they talked, Jack gradually relaxed, the stiffness leaving his shoulders. He asked thoughtful questions about her teaching and shared news of the territory that hadn't yet reached town. The storm raged outside, but within Piper's small quarters, a warm comfort settled between them. "I should go before the trail becomes impassable," Jack said eventually, though he made no immediate move to leave. "Surely you're not riding back to your ranch in this?" Piper gestured toward the window, where snow was falling in thick curtains. "Stayed in worse," he replied with a shrug. "There's a perfectly good hotel just down the street," Piper pointed out. Or the livery stable has a room for travelers. There's no sense in risking the journey tonight. Jack's eyes met hers, something unreadable in their depths. People might talk if I came to town just to get snowbound. Let them talk, Piper said firmly. I'd rather face gossip than know you froze to death being stubborn. A faint smile touched his lips. Anyone ever tell you you're forceful for a schoolteacher? Frequently, she admitted. Now, will you be sensible, or must I involve Sheriff Matthews? In the end, Jack agreed to take a room at the hotel, though he insisted on checking his horse at the livery first. Piper accompanied him, borrowing a heavy shawl against the snow. The main street was deserted, everyone having sought shelter from the storm. Why did you really come to town today? Piper asked as they struggled through drifts toward the livery. The medical supplies could have waited. Jack was silent for several strides. Thought you might need firewood, he said finally. Storm like this, supplies run low. You rode 20 miles in a blizzard to bring me firewood. Piper stopped, turning to face him despite the whipping snow. Sounds foolish when you put it that way, he admitted. Not foolish, Piper said softly. Kind. Something shifted in Jack's expression, a lowering of guards, perhaps. For a moment, they stood facing each other in the swirling white, the rest of Sweetwater fading to insignificance. Then Jack cleared his throat and moved on, the moment passing like a snowflake on warm skin. Yet something had changed between them, a recognition, unspoken but real. Jack stayed in town 3 days as the storm raged and then subsided. Each evening, he joined Piper for dinner, their conversations growing deeper and more personal with each passing night. She learned about his childhood in Kentucky, his parents' farm, the sister who had died of fever before the war. He listened as she spoke of Philadelphia, her father's illness, and her dreams of building something meaningful in Sweetwater Springs. On the third evening, as they sat before the fire in Piper's small sitting room, Jack asked the question that had clearly been on his mind. Why aren't you married? Woman like you, educated, pretty, must have had suitors back east. Piper considered her answer carefully. There were possibilities, she acknowledged, but after my father fell ill, caring for him became my priority, and afterward. She shrugged. The men who called themselves suitors were more interested in my father's library than in me. They saw a convenient wife who could host literary salons, not a partner. Their loss, Jack said simply. Piper smiled at his directness. What about you? Why no Mrs. Calloway tending your ranch? A shadow crossed his face. Was engaged once, before the war. Elizabeth Harmon, we had plans. He paused, staring into the fire. I came back different. She deserved better than half a man with nightmares. You broke the engagement, Jack nodded. She married a banker from Louisville last I heard, has 3 children now, and you've been alone ever since. Seemed easier, he said. Safer? For whom? Piper asked gently. Jack didn't answer, but his eyes, when they met hers, held a vulnerability that touched her deeply. The next morning dawned clear and cold. The storm had passed, leaving Sweetwater transformed beneath a blanket of pristine white. Jack prepared to depart, his horse rested, and his saddlebags filled with supplies for the journey home. Will you come back? Piper asked as they stood outside the livery stable. Need to check those medical supplies made it to Doc Wilson, Jack replied, adjusting his saddle. And Sheriff mentioned fence repair at the schoolyard. Might be a while though, winter makes travel difficult. It wasn't quite the answer Piper had hoped for, but she nodded in understanding. Well, you're welcome anytime for coffee or conversation. Jack paused in his preparations, turning to face her fully. Piper, he began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with words. Yes, he took a breath. I'm not good at this, been alone too long, but I've enjoyed these days more than I can say. So have I, Piper said softly. Jack nodded as if confirming something to himself. I'll be back before Christmas, he said finally. If that's all right, I'd like that very much. He mounted up, settling into the saddle with natural grace. With a final tip of his hat, he rode out of town, leaving Piper watching from the street, her heart lighter than it had been in months. True to his word, Jack returned to Sweetwater 2 weeks before Christmas. He came bearing gifts, a haunch of venison for the town's Christmas feast, handcrafted wooden toys for Piper's students, and for Piper herself, a beautifully bound volume of Emerson's essays. "Found it in Cheyenne," he explained as she ran her fingers over the tooled leather cover. "Thought you might like adding to your collection. It's perfect," Piper said, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Thank you." Jack stayed through Christmas, taking a room at the hotel but spending most of his waking hours either helping with preparations for the holiday or in Piper's company. The townspeople, initially surprised by the reclusive rancher's presence, soon accepted him as Piper's particular friend. If there was gossip, it remained respectfully subdued. On Christmas Eve, after the children's pageant at the church, Jack and Piper walked through the quiet town. Snow crunched beneath their boots, and stars blazed overhead in the clear, cold sky. "I never thanked you properly," Piper said as they paused on the bridge over Sweetwater Creek. "For the book, no thanks needed, not for the book, for that night with the wolves." She turned to face him, her breath forming clouds in the frosty air. "I was so frightened, and then you appeared like something from a story, firing into the darkness until I could breathe again." Jack's expression softened. "I still dream about it sometimes," he admitted. "Finding you there surrounded, what might have happened if I'd been just a few minutes later." "But you weren't," Piper said gently. "You were exactly where you needed to be." Their eyes held in the moonlight, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that first night by the campfire. Jack stepped closer, his hand coming up to brush a snowflake from her cheek. "Piper," he said, his voice low and rough with emotion, "I'm not good with words, not like your books, but I need you to know, these past months knowing you, it's changed things, changed me." Piper's heart quickened. "How so?" Made me wonder if alone is really better, made me think about possibilities I'd given up on. His hand lingered on her cheek. "Made me hope for things I hadn't let myself hope for in a very long time." Piper covered his hand with her own. "I've been hoping too," she whispered. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Jack lowered his head and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, tentative, a question rather than a demand. Piper answered by leaning into him, her free hand coming to rest on his chest as she returned the kiss with growing certainty. When they finally parted, Jack rested his forehead against hers. "I don't have much to offer," he said quietly, "just a remote ranch and a man who's still learning how to live in peace with his memories." "It sounds like exactly what I've been looking for," Piper replied, "a place to belong." "A person to belong with." Jack's smile, rare and transformative, lit his entire face. "Does that mean you might consider becoming Mrs. Calloway someday?" "I might," Piper said, her own smile matching his. "Though I have a school term to complete first." "These children deserve a teacher who honors her commitments." "I'd expect nothing less," Jack assured her. "I've waited years to find you. I can wait a few more months." Spring came to Wyoming Territory in fits and starts warm days followed by late snowfalls, muddy roads giving way to fields of wildflowers. Jack traveled to Sweetwater as often as ranch work allowed, sometimes staying only a day, sometimes a week. He repaired the schoolhouse roof, built new shelves for Piper's growing collection of books, and slowly became a familiar figure in town. As the school term neared its end, Piper and Jack made plans. They would marry in June after classes finished. Piper would move to the ranch, but they would maintain her quarters in town so she could continue teaching when the new term began in September. "It means a lot of traveling back and forth," Jack pointed out as they discussed the logistics. "For both of us," Piper agreed. "But it's worth it, don't you think? This way we don't have to choose between your ranch and my teaching." Jack's expression grew serious. "Are you sure, Piper? Ranch life is hard, isolated. You've built something here in town, friends, purpose." "I'll still have all that," she assured him. "And I'll have you. The rest we'll figure out together." Their wedding took place on a perfect June day, with wildflowers decorating the small church and the entire town in attendance. Piper wore a simple dress of ivory silk, ordered from Denver, while Jack looked both uncomfortable and handsome in a new suit. The celebration afterward spilled into the street, with tables of food, music from local fiddle players, and dancing that continued well past sunset. As twilight deepened, Jack took Piper's hand and led her away from the festivities. "Ready to see your new home, Mrs. Calloway?" he asked, helping her into the wagon he'd prepared for their departure. "More than ready, Mr. Calloway," she replied, her heart full to bursting with joy. The journey to the ranch took on a magical quality in the summer evening. Fireflies danced along the trail, and a full moon rose to light their way. Jack pointed out changes he'd made in preparation for her arrival: new curtains at the cabin windows, courtesy of Mrs. Bennett, a garden plot cleared and planted, a rocking chair on the porch. "It's not much compared to Philadelphia," he said as they approached. "It's everything compared to Philadelphia," Piper corrected him. "It's real, it's ours." Ranger greeted them with ecstatic barking, nearly upending the wagon in his excitement. Jack lifted Piper down, but instead of setting her on her feet, he held her in his arms. "Tradition says I carry you over the threshold," he explained, smiling down at her. "Far be it from me to argue with tradition," Piper replied, wrapping her arms around his neck. As Jack carried her into their home, Piper was struck by how much had changed in less than a year. From a terrified woman surrounded by wolves to a bride beginning a new life with the man who had saved her, the journey seemed both impossible and inevitable. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Jack traced the curve of Piper's shoulder with gentle fingers. "I never thought I'd have this," he confessed. "After the war, I figured some men weren't meant for happiness, just survival." "And now?" Piper asked, propping herself up to look into his face. "Now I know better," he said, pulling her close. "Now I know that sometimes happiness finds you even when you're not looking for it, even when you're convinced you don't deserve it." "You deserve every happiness, Jackson Calloway," Piper whispered against his lips. "And I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you never forget it." The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. True to their plan, Piper continued teaching in Sweetwater, staying in town during the week and returning to the ranch on weekends and holidays. Jack expanded his cattle operation and took on 2 ranch hands, allowing him more freedom to visit Piper in town when ranch work permitted. Their first child, a daughter they named Emma, arrived in the spring of 1879. She was born at the ranch with Mrs. Bennett serving as midwife, Jack pacing anxiously outside until the older woman shooed him in to meet his daughter. "She has your eyes," Piper told him as he held the tiny bundle with trembling hands. "And your spirit, I'll wager," Jack replied, awe evident in his voice. "Look how she's already fighting against that swaddling." Emma grew into a curious, adventurous child who loved both the freedom of the ranch and the bustle of town. By the time her brother Thomas joined the family 2 years later, she was already helping her father with simple chores and teaching her dolls their letters, just as she'd seen her mother do with her students. Life settled into a rhythm that suited them both. Summers and holidays were spent entirely at the ranch, where Piper planted an expansive garden and started a small orchard. During the school year, they navigated their arrangement with good humor and growing confidence, grateful for the community that supported their unconventional lifestyle. The wolves returned only once, 5 years after that first fateful encounter. It was winter, and Piper was alone at the ranch with the children while Jack delivered cattle to a buyer in Cheyenne. A heavy snow had fallen, and as darkness descended, Piper heard the familiar howling that still occasionally haunted her dreams. "Stay inside," she instructed Emma and Thomas firmly, loading Jack's rifle with hands steadier than she felt. From the porch, she could see them, a pack of 7, leaner and more desperate than the ones she'd faced years before. They circled the property, drawn by the scent of livestock in the barn. Ranger barked furiously from his position at Piper's side, sensing her tension and the danger beyond. Piper raised the rifle, sighted along the barrel as Jack had taught her, and fired a warning shot into the air. The wolves paused but didn't retreat. One large gray male, perhaps the pack leader, took a step toward the house, eyes reflecting the lantern light. Piper's next shot was deliberate, striking the ground directly in front of the wolf. The animal jumped back, startled, and the pack retreated several yards. "Get back," Piper shouted, her voice strong with determination rather than fear. "You won't find easy prey here." She fired again and again, methodically creating a barrier of sound and threat between her family and the predators. By the sixth shot, the wolves had vanished into the darkness, driven away by her unwavering defense. When Jack returned 2 days later, Piper recounted the incident with a calm that surprised even her. "Weren't you afraid?" he asked, holding her close after the children had been put to bed. "Of course," she admitted, "but I knew what to do this time. You taught me well." Jack kissed her forehead, pride evident in his expression. "You're remarkable, Piper Calloway. Most women would have been terrified." "I was terrified the first time," she reminded him, "but life out here has a way of teaching you to face your fears." "Besides," she added with a smile, "I had good reason to be brave. I was protecting our home, our children." "Our life," Jack said softly. "Yes," Piper agreed, settling into his embrace, "our life. The one that began when you fired into the darkness and saved me." "Seems to me you've done your share of saving since then," Jack observed. "Saved me from a life of solitude, saved our children from wolves. You might be the bravest person I know, Piper Freemont Calloway." As they sat together in the warmth of their home, Piper reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From Philadelphia society to Wyoming wilderness, from strangers to devoted partners, it was a path neither could have predicted, but one she would choose again without hesitation. Outside, the Wyoming night spread vast and star-filled above their snug cabin. Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth, illuminating the books they'd collected together, the children's toys scattered across the rug, the life they'd built from unlikely beginnings. Years later, when their children were grown with families of their own, Piper and Jack would still sometimes sit on their porch in the evening, watching the sun set over the land they'd tended together. Jack's hair had turned silver, and Piper's hands showed the marks of years of work, but their connection remained as strong as it had been that night on the Christmas Eve bridge. "Do you ever wonder," Piper would ask occasionally, "what might have happened if you hadn't heard those wolves that night, if you hadn't come looking for the source of the gunshots?" And Jack would take her hand in his, the gesture as natural as breathing after decades together. "No," he would answer truthfully. "Some things are meant to be, Piper. I was meant to find you, and you were meant to teach me how to live again. Everything else is just details." In the end, their story became part of Sweetwater's folklore, the Eastern schoolteacher surrounded by wolves, the reclusive rancher who fired into the darkness until she could breathe, and the love that grew from that unlikely beginning. It was a tale told around campfires and at town gatherings, embellished over time but true in its essence. For Jack and Piper, though, it wasn't legend but simply their life built day by day, choice by choice, through hardship and joy, sustained by a love that had found them when neither was looking in the wild heart of the Wyoming frontier.